Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
And good morning, Dr. Liss. Thank you so much for being with us. I see Sandra Hawthorne, who invited you, is joining us this morning. So glad you could join us. Glad everybody is here for the virtual lunch bunch. And Sandra, you want to take over?
Okay, then great. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jonathan L. Liss, who is the founder and primary physician of the Columbus Memory Center, and he's also the founder of the Columbus Memory Project. So sit back, you're in for a treat. He's going to give us all a lot of good ideas and his suggestions and what we need to do about good health, memory health. All right, Dr. Liss.
Well, thank you so much. You know, personally, in the future, I would prefer very low expectations. Like it's going to be long. It's going to be boring and arduous, a bit like a test. You guys have been there before. Let's just get through it together. You know, that would work out a little bit better, right? Anyway, thank you guys for having me. I think I spoke with you actually in person several years back. There's unfortunately no lunches, but what the heck? We'll have to do it ourselves, right? It's good to be with you. So I thought today that I would just bring up, not the term hodgepodge would be the wrong term because it's all going to be related to Alzheimer's disease, but I thought I would pick out some sort of hot button issues that are constantly asked, constantly discussed, and I think it'll give a fuller understanding of this thing that we call Alzheimer's disease and where we're going with it. And so it's not quite a title of a talk or a theme to a talk like we're going to prevent Alzheimer's disease or how to treat Alzheimer's disease or whatnot, but give a general overview that I think will give a well-rounded look at this thing. So to begin with, I always start out with the issue of Alzheimer's disease versus dementia, because everybody says, what's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? And my mother, may she rest in peace, who did not die with Alzheimer's disease, but died with 86 years of being goofy, used to ask me, I tell you once a month, what's the difference? And I said, Mom, we discussed that last month and you don't have a memory problem. But it's just easy for these things to go away. So let's just remember that dementia is a category the same way that sports is a category. And so we've got a million different kinds of sports, but if we looked at the world's most common organized sport, that would likely be soccer, I assume anyway. And so if you were to see a tall, well, at least a very fit young person who looked athletic in the world, you would guess that more often than others. You guys are educators. I should have gone, my undergraduate degree is in English. So I always say that if you're gonna actually have to guess on a game show a quote, you should always say Hamlet, because you're gonna have a better chance of being right if you say Hamlet than anything else. So if you have an older person who has the gradual loss of short-term memory, then you're going to be right more often by saying Alzheimer's disease than anything else. And because Alzheimer's disease makes up about 2/3 of all of the dementias in the world. And if you take it, then set it down, it's not a 12-year-old who fell off his bike, and it's not a person who's been drinking alcohol to excess for their whole lives. If you take out those kinds of things and you have an older person who has a gradual loss of short-term memory, almost always it's going to be Alzheimer's disease or a very close variant to it. So that's that. There's another category. So again, dementia is a category. There's another category that we call mild cognitive impairment. And mild cognitive impairment means that somebody is not at the top of his or her game, but it doesn't say why. Again, just a general category. So we see, and you were kind enough to mention the Columbus Memory Project. We offer a free memory test to anybody that wants to come in anytime they want to do it, as long as we're here. We call it the memory number. We invented for the world the first ever vital sign for the brain. And the reason why I bring that up is that about 40% of the people that take this test come back with impaired scores. Wow, that's a dramatic number. But most of them don't have Alzheimer's disease. Most of them are not thinking at the top of their game. They got mild cognitive impairment for other reasons, that they're on sleeping pills that they shouldn't be taking, or they've got chronic pain that's distracting, or most commonly depression or anxiety for which they can't keep their concentration going. So they have lots of things that keep them with mild cognitive impairment, but it's not a degenerative dementia. In our field, that when somebody has mild cognitive impairment related to Alzheimer's disease, we call it prodromal Alzheimer's disease, on the pathway towards Alzheimer's disease, that it's starting to affect, typically, it doesn't have to be this, but most of the time it would affect their short-term memory to a modest degree, just enough that somebody notices it. Usually it's themselves. And so they have some modest amount of memory loss, but they're fully functional. They could be teaching a class. They could be a truck driver. They could be any of those things, but we evaluate them and then we see that there's something coming on that is not correctable the way, maybe anxiety and depression would be correctable. All right. So with that, that's kind of the foundational stuff. Remember that Alzheimer's disease is a disease. And I had a patient this morning, unfortunately, relatively young. She was 68 and she's very, very badly affected. She had it for several years. And the family said, her mother and my mother, it's the husband talking, her mother and my mother were really, really sick at the same time. And we had to take care of them. And we really, struggled. And it was about this time that this happened. Do you think it's that? And I said, well, we've already talked about the fact that you believe her mental health is in incredibly good shape, that you feel that she's happy all the time and that she doesn't appear to be anxious or depressed. And so it is no longer that. A person can come in and not think, well, because of a mental illness, but if that's really taken care of, that's no longer the issue because this is a disease. Let's treat it as a disease. It's not contagious, first of all, but it is a disease, and it should get the same respect as cancer or heart attack or anything else that you would talk about being serious. And I think finally we are getting to that point where we are taking it seriously. And I think part of the reason why we're getting to the point where it's being taken seriously is the issue of how far we've come. So I'm going to be going in about 2 weeks to Spain to lecture on this exact topic. And so I was trying to think of a good analogy to explain how far we've come, because I think most people that look at this illness have a very negative opinion. Certainly the medical profession is like, oh, well, maybe, let's check your diabetes, let's ignore this thing. And I think this nihilistic approach is because we haven't been able to tout our successes, or we haven't touted them. And because the medications for this have not yet come to the point where we're going to be really excited about it. But I want to, for a moment, tout our successes and give it the comparison to the space telescope. Any of you that have been watching the news over the last, 3 months or so, maybe not quite that long, 2 months, that we now have a telescope that is hovering 1 million miles above the Earth. 1 million miles. Think about that. This was launched from a rocket. And when you read about it, that, the whole thing is, it's so big that they couldn't just, put it in a rocket and then shove it up there. They had to have it fold down like origami into component parts. And just the simplest part of this thing, that because it's so high and so much closer to the sun, that they had to make certain it had a sun shield. And the sun shield is the size of a tennis court. And the sun shield had to open up after its origami fold and come out and protect this giant telescope. Well, for those of us that don't know a thing about space, and I'm one of those people, that it's as if they rolled this thing out on the launch pad and they shoved it up into space, and there it is, right? Nice job, way to go, ladies and gentlemen, and things. But the reality is, this is 25 years, probably longer than that, but certainly 25 years of intense scientific pursuit to figure out how to get the mirror just right, how to make the sun shield just right, how to get the computers to work, and the different wavelength measurements. And of course, the rocket itself. And so 25 years, and we should celebrate all that tremendous effort that's gone on there for the past 25 years. And that's what's happening in the field of Alzheimer's care. So if you take it back to my beginnings, my origins in this field, which go back almost 30 years ago, and I know you guys are saying, and that's not possible. He's way too young for that. And by the way, my grandson's going to be 1 year old. And I also know you guys know that that's not possible. I just tell everybody my daughter is only 13. She doesn't appreciate that, but it makes me seem a little bit younger. Any case, and 30 years ago, I was as a young plebe, was asking people on behalf of my attending physicians to volunteer for Alzheimer's research, because we literally didn't know which way to turn. We were asking people to take cognitive tests each year so we could better understand the progression of the disease. We were asking people to donate their brains once they died so that we could match their brains to the disease that we saw or had measured before they had died. We asked them to do spinal taps. We asked them to do all kinds of things. Certainly some sort of experimental drugs, but not ones that we expected to help them, but just better to be able to measure things. And certainly a lot of blood tests and things of that nature. And the families too, by the way, the families did all this too, because we had to get their opinion on how they thought their loved one was doing. So 30 years ago, that's where I started. That's my origin story. There were no medications for this illness, and we didn't know which way to turn. And then we developed, while I was in training, we developed the first ever drug for Alzheimer's disease. And it was such a rotten drug that even though my university invented it, we didn't use it. But it was an important moment in history, because we were able to tell the public, hey, something's happened. We've invented a drug. We're on our way. And that led to maybe 2 years later to the drugs that are currently on the market. The most famous one would be called donepezil or Aricept. And that drug's been around for more than 25 years without much change. And then 2 more Me Too drugs came onto that. 10 years after that, 10 years after that, another sort of weak drug called memantine came out, which is in a different category. So now we have one category with 3 drugs, got another category with 1 drug, but there's nothing really, too much to get excited over. And so the doctors ignore this disease, the public ignores this disease, everybody has a very nihilistic attitude. But in the trenches behind all of this, what we've been doing day in and day out, 365, 7 days a week, all that kind of stuff, is that we've been trying to develop new technologies. And now, what have new technologies allowed us to do? Well, of course, you're all familiar with an MRI. MRI wasn't designed for this, but when I came to Columbus in 1995, I was thinking about not coming to Columbus because MRI had really just been invented a year or 2 before, maybe 3. And I thought, will a small town like Columbus have an MRI? Well, it turns out we had like 6. So that's the American way if there's a buck to be made, right? By the way, at the time I had an Irish intern. And in all of Ireland, they had 2 MRIs. And in Columbus, I think had 6 when I moved here. So it just shows you the difference in these things. So the MRI allowed us to see if there's a stroke or if there's a particular amount of vascular disease. CAT scan could see some of this before that, but an MRI could really actually look at the areas of the brain that we know are responsible for memory loss and see if there's anything that is damaging to them. Because of that, we were then able to get what's called volumetric MRI, where with that, we can actually measure what something weighs and how thick it is. I mean, imagine that. While somebody's alive and not causing any harm to them whatsoever, we can actually measure thickness layers and get a weight on these things. That way we can know if as the brain shrinks, because all of our brains are shrinking, unfortunately, but as the brain shrinks, we can see, is it shrinking in a way in which the volume would match other people of that age group, or is it shrinking more than that? So that was a real advancement. We then, and I may not get these exactly in order, but I think really then we got what was called functional MRI, spectroscopy, and then eventually what's called PET scan. But the spectroscopy could measure where blood flow goes to. And this is really a fascinating field because you can put people in a scanner, and like the famous ones are people who are comatose, right? Or, that there's no response whatsoever. And occasionally you'll put somebody in a scanner and they haven't responded in a year or 5 years. And you say, I would like you to think of a Picasso. And all of a sudden you'll see the areas of the brain responsible for vision fill up with blood, which means that person actually heard what we were asking and actually in their mind was looking at a Picasso. And so that kind of testing now allowed us to measure all kinds of things, everything from stroke to memory to thinking. And then we took the next step, which was the PET scan. The PET scan that's covered under Medicare has been around for a while. And unfortunately, almost everybody, I'm sure everybody on this call has either experienced or known somebody that's experienced cancer. So when somebody gets cancer, they get a whole body PET scan. And what they do for that is they give radioactive sugar. Cancer loves sugar. It's highly metabolic, so it's eating sugar constantly. And so if a person, let's say, has breast cancer and they go in for the scanner and their kneecap is eating sugar like crazy, we don't actually see the cancer, but we say, you know what, we infer their cancer has to be on the kneecap because the kneecap doesn't have that much metabolic activity. It shouldn't be eating that much sugar. And so we can indirectly say there's cancer there. Well, in my field, in Alzheimer's disease, we only look at the brain, of course. We give the same sugar, but in this case, we're looking for brain cells that are not eating sugar well. And all of you being in education have seen kids where they're trying to fake disease, right? Including my kids. And so they're like, I don't feel well enough to go to school, right? But, if you put a candy bar by their pillow and it's gone, by 7:15 in the morning, pretty well things are okay. On the other hand, if that candy bar is sitting by the pillow at the end of the day, they need all the TLC that you should have given them initially, right? A little guilt. And so when we see that, we then look for patterns. If there's brain cells that are not eating sugar well, then is there a pattern to how they're not eating sugar well? And then we can look at a variety of illnesses, but we can't say specifically, we can only say the pattern, just like we can't say specifically that we saw that breast cancer, but we can say that the brain cells are not eating sugar well. The pattern is similar to the pattern that we see in Alzheimer's disease or frontal temporal lobe dementia or Parkinson's disease. You can choose the brain injury that we would be talking about. And so then we got the PET scans, and then we took the next step with the PET scans, and we have developed isotopes that actually bond to the proteins that cause this disease. And so the beginning of this disease is the beginning of what we call beta amyloid. It's a protein we don't want in our brains. And we now can bind to it. This is not covered under Medicare. This is just a research level brain scan. Because everybody's making money. Lilly is really fighting hard to get Medicare to cover that. And in many ways, I wish they would. I actually sat on a committee about, gosh, this has been going for a long time, probably 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I was in this, if you guys remember Legionnaire's disease, I was in Philadelphia at the hotel that was the Legionnaire's Hotel. And by the way, if you're in Philadelphia, go visit that hotel. It is fantastic. I mean, it's an old hotel, like the rooms, like the conference rooms, the wood is this thick on the edgings, and the doors are gorgeous, and it's just spectacular. But of course I digress here. But I was sitting in there, and this was the very beginning of this, and I was sitting on a government panel to help make a decision whether they should cover these things, and this special kind of amyloid and tau test. And in the end, we unanimously recommended they didn't, because we didn't have any hope of a therapy at that time. And so what would be the point of finding something for which we tell people they have no hope of a therapy? And we're also concerned that people might commit suicide if they found out. And we're also concerned that doctors would just be ordering so many of these when they weren't necessary that it would bankrupt the system. So we voted no. Now here we are, these 15 or 16 years later, and it's not that I regret my decision, it was the right decision, but we do need access to these scans, because the only time I get them is through my research, and they are very, very helpful. So Lilly makes one of these tracers. They've been doing a thing called the IDEA study that is trying to show that doctors will change their diagnosis and their treatment if they have access to these tests when they're uncertain about the diagnosis. And so that may happen in the near future. But in any case, so we can now bind to amyloid. The other protein is called tau, T-A-U, just like the Greek letter. And that comes in a while after amyloid is already there. Tau does seem to do more damage than amyloid, but you can't get tau without amyloid already being there, at least not in Alzheimer's disease. And so we now have tracers that can bind onto both those things. And so that has allowed us to look in the brain in advance to see if somebody's going to get this disease. I'm going back to the space telescope, like all this work's been done for all of these years. So we can now look, by the way, with just the things I've told you so far, we can look in the brain 20 years in advance, okay, and see if areas of the brain responsible for Alzheimer's disease are beginning to shrink, okay? And we do see that in certain individuals. So this disease, and that's also an important point, that this disease is not a light switch. You didn't, like in the old days, like with a lot of diseases, like, oh, the person got Alzheimer's disease, like a light switch with, they now have Alzheimer's disease. But if you now look at it with our advanced testing, this has been a 20-year process. And we probably don't need to find it 20 years early, but it's nice to know that it's there, because that gives opportunities to interdict in this disease for as long as one could possibly imagine. So any case, so we develop these things that grab onto these proteins. We can measure amyloid, we can measure tau, and then we develop spinal fluid technology, which is now the most sensitive things. So we can do a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture. These things seem to scare people. I don't blame them for being scared, but they're very easy. We do them in the office all the time. People shrug their shoulders. They come in scared and they leave shrugging their shoulders. It was no big deal. Not much different than a blood draw, really, in skilled hands. Something I do well, so I'm skilled at it. So I do think that people have gone to the emergency room where there's a brand new intern and they're learning how to pull the needle out of the thing, and they never want one again. But it's usually not hard. But with the spinal fluid, we can look in and confirm a person has the disease, okay, without any doubt at this point now. So that becomes very important, that we can get a very solid diagnosis. And what you will see in the very near future are a number of less invasive tests to see if a person either has it or is on their way. Everything from blood tests to saliva tests to stool samples to eye checks. There's a whole gamut of things coming this way. I was at a research conference, my first research conference I've been to in 2 years. I mean, we've been on Zoom, but I went to Boston, and they announced that a test is coming out some point this year that will give a 6-year warning of Alzheimer's disease. And actually, if you have Alzheimer's disease, even stage where you are in the disease. That's a really profound statement. They presented very convincing data, but it's not here. It's not out on the market yet. So we'll see if they come through with their claims, but it looked pretty impressive. But that will be an interesting one, because that'll be an affordable test, which means that people go to their doctor and say, get me this, or a doctor could order it without really doing much thinking and come back and say, oh my God, they're going to have Alzheimer's in 6 years. Did they want to know, right? These are important questions to prevail. But going back to the analogy with the space telescope, we've been doing all of this as a way in which to eventually cure this illness. And we can't get to the point of curing this illness without this 20, 25 years of work that nobody really knows about. Okay. So when we come up with the, ultimate therapy for Alzheimer's disease, don't think it came out yesterday. We've been working on this for decades, and we are going to get it. And that's a really, good point that I want to make. So going back to the spectrum of memory loss and Alzheimer's disease, I want you to understand that we start out with prodromal, which means clinically normal, and then prodromal, which means they're accumulating the protein, but it doesn't seem to affect them cognitively, to mild cognitive impairment related to Alzheimer's disease, which now they know it, we know it, or sometimes we don't, sometimes we miss it, but it's the very beginning stages. And then Alzheimer's disease itself, where you get early, moderate, and severe disease. So now that we know that there's a pathway, we can interdict in any one of these pathways. That's the goal, is to try and interdict. All right, the next thing I put on my little list of things that I think are cause confusion and need to be discussed is the issue of genetic risk and ApoE status. I think that gets talked about a lot in the press without anybody really explaining any of that. So first of all, the question comes up, is Alzheimer's disease a genetic illness? And the answer is yes, it is. And also, sort of, you shouldn't care, sort of. And the reason why I say sort of you shouldn't care is it's incredibly common. So if your genetics were perfect, you shouldn't go home and go, I am safe. You can still get the disease. And if you have the genetics, you shouldn't say I'm doomed, because you still are more likely not to get the disease than you are, okay? So genetics play a role, but after the age of 85 and above, the disease becomes so common that genetics, we don't even think about genetics. It's just a common illness. It's somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 people above age 85 have the disease. I mean, that's about as common as you're going to get anything. And so that's why we really have to get a handle on this illness. So ApoE, apolipoprotein E, you get either a 2, a 3, or a 4. Those are the numbers that we attach to them. And then there's a 3R, because we have to make things a little more complicated, which is a recessive one. So 2, 3, 3R, or 4. You get one from mom and you get one from dad. All right. And then you guys probably remember, I don't know how many of you guys are biology teachers, but y'all took biology. And so you might remember, or maybe you missed that question, homozygotes versus heterozygotes. So a homozygote means that you have the same on both sides. A homozygote, mom gave you, let's say, an E3, dad gave you an E3, you're homozygous for E3. But if somebody gave you an E3 and the other one gave you an E4, you'd be a heterozygote, and you'd have a 3 and a 4, okay? So just looking at them and understanding them a bit, no, there is not a genetic where you escape risk. We base this on the average population. So if you look at an E3 and both parents gave you an E3, you have a roughly 25% risk of getting this disease by the time you're age 85. And now I've got to give a shameful head down thing, is that this data I'm giving you today is done on white people only. And which is, I don't understand why we don't have this for every single race. It makes no sense to me. Obviously, this is a common illness. This should be easily tracked, but it hasn't come out. I don't know why. But so I apologize that science has just not done a good job. But let me just say, so it's probably roughly true for other races, but this is, to be fairness in disclosure, this is for white people. So in any case, E3, roughly a 25% chance of getting this disease by the time you're age 85. If you are lucky enough, and nobody hardly is lucky enough, to get an E2, because I hardly ever see an E2, that your risk goes down to probably 15%. They don't know exactly because there's not that many E2s. And then if you get an E4, then your risk starts to increase. So if one parent gave you an average gene, that's E3, and one parent gave you a high risk gene, that's E4, then your risk is going to go up kind of 25 to 40% by the time you're age 85 of developing this illness. And then finally, if you got stuck with 2 rotten parents, an E4 from each, then your risk goes somewhere between 45 and 55%. So we just say 50% roughly. How about a 50-50 chance of developing Alzheimer's disease by the time you're age 85? Okay. So that's still, if you're a cup half empty person, you say, gosh, that's a high risk. If you're a cup half full person, you say, gosh, there's a good chance I'm not going to get this disease, right? So but anyway, that's the ApoE story. And I want people to understand that checking your ApoE status is important to know what you're getting out of it. And also important to recognize that you may be polluting somebody else's mind. So if you got kids, you got brothers and sisters, those kinds of things. And so I always say, look, Mrs. Jones, we could check it, but do you want to know? Because if I tell you, it's possible that like, let's just say you have 2 E4s, that means your children will definitely get 1 E4, one bad gene, right? And so do you have a depressed daughter, an anxious son that may not handle this news well? Because my guess is you're not going to keep it a secret. And so it affects your siblings or affects your children, it affects your siblings. They may not want to know. And then also, to a much less extent, it can affect issues of job and insurance. So if you're part of a large group, like 100 or more, then I think, or it's 50 or 100 more, they can't discriminate based on genetics. But if you're part of a small company, theoretically, your employer could say, I don't want you because you got bad genes. I don't think we're quite there yet, but that could happen. And then, of course, for disability and long-term care insurance, that they're going to ask you if you know. And if you know, you would have to disclose that you know. And then either they won't insure you or they charge a higher rate. So you have to decide whether it's something you want to know. Okay. Anyway, that's an ApoE status. The next thing I want to talk about is just the issue of protecting your brains. We have a saying that everything that's heart healthy is brain healthy. So I'm not going to go over all that kind of stuff because that's very obvious about smoking and diabetes and hypertension and cholesterol and all that kind of stuff. But I want to give you a piece of good news because I think this one is so easy. I think you really feel good leaving today's talk with this knowledge. So there's data that says that if you follow 4 out of 5 healthy brain things, I'm about to list them, 4 out of 5, that you can reduce your risk of getting a dementia by 60%. That's really profound, right? And when I tell you these 4 out of 5, some of you will already be doing all 5, and many of you will already be doing 4 out of the 5. So it's like almost nothing. So the first thing is out of these 5, the first thing is having some sort of regular exercise that is of moderate or higher duration, or not duration, but intensity. So what we say is a 20-minute walk 3 times per week where your heart rate, and this gets a little crafty, where your heart rate's like 2/3 its maximum, as long as you're not going to die of a heart attack. So if you're walking and your heart starts to really beat fast, you're doing a little sweating for 20 minutes, that's the exercise we're talking about. That's not a very high bar to go, right? So you take a nice 20-minute walk, don't look at the flowers, and then you spend 40 minutes walking back looking at the flowers, right? You got your hour in. So anyway, that's one. The second thing is not smoking. So if you smoke, figure out a way to quit. That's a big one. Love for you to quit. But if you're not smoking, you already got one under your belt, right? The third one is reducing alcohol intake to light or moderate. I'm closer to light than moderate. And so if you're not drinking alcohol to excess, you have already accomplished one of those things. The next thing is the hardest one for all of us. And now this is where I think, well, this is one we all have to give up, which is a heart healthy diet. And what we mean by that is really sort of a Mediterranean diet. And I think very few people follow that around here, including me. And so if you're a health conscious person and you're eating a really, good diet, you've accomplished one of those. But that's hard for most people to do. But the closer you can get to it, the better off you're going to likely be. So Mediterranean diet, high in fish and beans and proteins like that. And then the last one, which is what you guys are doing right now, so you already get a thing, is cognitive activity. Our mantra here at the Columbus Memory Center is be smarter tomorrow than you were yesterday. And so you can do that in a million different ways. My personal passion is history. So I read history virtually every day. And so I always know I'm going to learn something that I didn't know yesterday. And I'm always going to be smarter tomorrow. So whether your passion is religion or politics or education or cars, or you choose the thing, do something that you didn't know how to do yesterday so that you're smarter. And it doesn't have to be just cognitive. It can be partially, hands-on. It could be, repairing a toaster or a new pattern with crochet or things of that nature, or a new pie, something you didn't know how to do. And that is exercising things. And you guys, everybody always preaches the choir. You guys are the choir. You're in this thing, so you must be doing these kind of things. But we would suggest do it regularly. And then if you remember a few years back, there was a 4 fee, and probably still out there, they just don't advertise like they did, Lumosity, where they would, you'd have games to play at home for a fee. Those things work perfectly fine. We were never big backers of them as an industry because we found that you can do better. The data would say you would do better by being in society, talking to people, having a book club, doing these talks. That actually does better because it exercises the mind and also helps with depression and anxiety. These interactions tend to help people. So nothing wrong with Lumosity if somebody wants to do that. The other problem that we did see with that is it's a bit addictive, even like a teenager, is that older folks start staying all day on their games. And that's probably not healthy overall for exercise or for social function or for depression, anxiety issues. So any case, but we think that's important. So I mentioned sort of a proven holistic, so to speak, holistic thing, and that would be, mind games. Let's talk for a second about holistic. Well, I'll give you another couple holistics, and then we're going to go to then we're going to beat down Prevagen. If you're looking at things that have some evidence that help, there's not very much, outside of medicine, what we're talking about. There's not so much. It would appear that curcumin, which is a derivative of ginger, 90 milligrams twice a day, might offer some benefit for preventing this illness. There is, things that are antioxidants like blueberries probably help. There's lots of things that are manufactured that don't seem to have the same antioxidant potential that we'd otherwise expect. So, for instance, manufactured vitamin E is not the same as vitamin E that you get from fish. And so it takes very high dose of vitamin E to get the antioxidant potential that we're hoping for. And vitamin E increases the risk of bleeding a bit. So there's no free ride in that regard. So anyway, things that are antioxidants make some sense. Curcumin has some evidence behind it. And eating a heart healthy diet, by all means does. Every brain cell that you save from a heart attack or stroke or whatever those things that would do it, you're saving to protect against Alzheimer's disease. And that's the reality of doing that. And by the way, if we talk about incidence and prevalence of this disease, that really exciting, not this disease, dementia as a category. If you look at the category of dementia, is that the prevalence of this disease is going down. Excuse me, the incidence of this is going down. The number per 100 is going down. And that's because people overall are starting to get a bit healthier in the way they approach life. I know we have added weight as a community, as a world, we certainly have. But if you go back to the days of Jack LaLanne, I know none of you are old enough to remember Jack LaLanne. I used to play baseball with his son, by the way. I grew up in Hollywood, California. And Jack LaLanne was like that first guy that got on TV and said, I think exercise makes a difference in living a long life. And so that started the beginning of what has become probably $1 trillion exercise industry, and people do a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's also spun off various, heart healthy diets and supplements and things of that nature, getting people to pay attention to their quitting smoking, all of this kind of stuff. And the runner, Jim somebody, Jim Fix, who used to always talk about running. He wrote a book on running to increase that. Now he died a young man. But he died a young man. His family was littered with heart disease, so we can't really say that it didn't work for him. He may have lived longer because of it, but he did die young. And then you get the people marketing off it, like if you guys remember Yul Gibbons and grape nuts. And I think he used to say something like, an acorn could really help you, but you try a grape nut. And I thought, these grape nuts really taste like acorns, but we ate them, I guess. Any case, so there is some over the counter stuff that you can go after. If we look at how people are trying to make a buck off you, where they're just really charlatans, the biggest one clearly is Prevagen. And now we've got, and it's probably the same company, I haven't even looked, but Nariva. These are things just trying to take your money, particularly Prevagen. Nariva at least has a collection of vitamins, I think, in it, so you're not going to do yourself any harm. I don't think you'll do yourself any benefit, but at least it's nothing terrible. Prevagen, I have it on my cell phone because I've taped it a few times. When they have a commercial, I try and stop it and then capture their saying at the bottom. So they've got, they started out, of course, with doctors. Well, I don't know if they were doctors, but they wore coats as if they were doctors. And they would say clinical trials show that Prevagen slows down memory loss. Try Prevagen, right? And then they got sued by the FDA, which I knew they knew they would, right? But they put out so many commercials that the message was already out there fully. And so after the FDA sued them and they had to pay some sort of fine for this, that then their next set of commercials was the Prevagen, the pharmacist's #1 recommended memory aid. And that's darn true because they'd sold so much of it. And then, the pharmacists make $20, $30, $40, $50 based on what strength you buy. Strength, isn't that funny? What's 0 times 0? Any case, so they're making a bunch of money off it. So why wouldn't they sell it? And my pharmacist, who I like a lot, I've given him a little bit of hell because Prevagen, you walk in next to the cash register, there's a big display for Prevagen. Right behind him, when you're talking to him, paying your bill, giant display of Prevagen, Prevagen. And we should do better than that. It doesn't offer any benefit. By the way, because I try and be honest, but not too honest, I have also started my own program trying to make a buck off of this thing. So, and any of you guys can sign up if you want to, that for $10 per month, that if you want to join my club, I will send you a letter every month, hand signed, that says don't buy Prevagen. And that way you'll come out $30, $50, $80, $90 a head per month. We'll make $10. We have a family plan, $14 a month if you want us to send it to more than one member of the family. I feel like it's a good way for me to make a buck and still sort of be honest about it, right? So anyway, some of you, I'm sure, taking Prevagen, and the commercials are amazing. Oh, third generation commercials, third generation. These incredibly believable and probably are real human beings who are rocket scientists and engineers and all this kind of stuff, sitting on a patio overlooking a lake and talking about how Prevagen has saved their brains, right? It's happened. And I got to say, probably some of that is true. Placebo is an incredibly powerful motivator, right? And so some of them probably do think better because they believe that they think better, right? It happens. I always give this little analogy, and you're welcome to use this with your friends if you want. But when we talk about it, like a patient will come into my office and they'll say, I'll say, how'd it go? And they go, oh, I couldn't take that drug. And I go, oh, what happened? They said, I took it, and 5 minutes later, all of a sudden, my face broke out in acne and my hand fell off. And I go, wow. I mean, that's profound. Then I go, look, I believe that your face filled with acne, and I'm glad your hand's been reattached. And I'm sure that happened to you, but I really don't think the drug could have caused that. They said, doctor, it happened as soon as I took that medicine. And then I said, well, let's remember, first of all, that in its testing, it never showed that it caused acne or the loss of a hand. I said, and second of all, it takes at least an hour to get in your bloodstream, so we wouldn't expect it to happen in 5 minutes. I said, I'm not doubting you, but let's think about cause and effect. And they're going, but it happened. And I go, I know it happened. I said, let's pretend for a moment that we're in my backyard where I don't actually have a lemon tree, but let's pretend I have the most beautiful lemon tree. I do have a nice yard. Together we're going to have a picnic, and we go and we grab a couple of lemons off the tree and we bring them back. And we're already looking at this beautiful, sour, lemon that we're going to be able to have. And together we slice it in half, and I give you a half and I give you a half. And just as a little fun prank, we each take our tongue and we lick this very sour lemon. So if you're actually paying attention to this talk, what's happening right now is your mouth is filling with saliva, right? Because you thought of a sour lemon, right? And so if people believe that they're going to think better because they took this thing, Prevagen or anything else, they probably are doing a little bit better, right? They're releasing the chemicals that make them feel good about themselves. And that one person that feels like they're doing better are going to go tell 10 friends, and a couple of those are going to feel better, and they're going to each tell 10 friends, and now you got 100, and now 10 more people, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. But it is a meaningless drug. And if you look at the commercial and you put the pause at the end, that in white writing that is so small it's hard to read, you got to be right up next to your TV, and it's white writing against a multicolored background, so some of the area is white behind it, so some of the words cannot even be seen. It says, essentially, do not pay attention to anything we just said. We are making no claims, and that's what the phrase says. And I just wish they'd be forced to like say it out loud or put it in print that people could read, because they are making billions and billions of dollars off of this thing. It's snake oil. Okay. Next on my little list of things that I want to talk about was the memory number we started the conversation about, and Alzheimer's prevention. So you guys are educators. I need you on my team. I need everybody to tell all their friends who are older that they need to get a memory number every year. We've made it as simple as I know to make it, which is that there's no appointment necessary, there is no cost, and they don't get a doctor out of it. So they would drop in our office any day that they were feeling, well. We want somebody come in and when they're not thinking well, and say, I want to take the memory number. They'll be given some paperwork, which they will fill out. It'll take about 10 minutes. We want to get just a little bit of medical history on them. And then also there's a bunch of pieces of paper that says, I am not your doctor, so that we don't establish a doctor-patient relationship. And there's a bunch of pieces of paper that says, look, a bad score does not mean that you have dementia. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, about 40% of the people that take this test score below what they should. It's really rather shocking. I think that if people had a lung problem and they used to be able to, run, a mile, and now they're barely able to walk a block, that they would go to their doctor and find out what's wrong with their heart or lungs, right? But with memory problems, they're still getting by. They're still doing all the same things they did before. They may not be doing them quite as sharply, and they just let it go because it's insidious. So one of the things about the memory number that's made me feel really good, and I didn't realize it would happen before, but one of those things is that it's allowing people to know that they're not at the top of their mental game, and yet there's a chance they might be able to get back there. Most of the people can get back there because most of the time, frankly, it's a correctable etiology: depression, anxiety, sleep apnea, side effects of medications. We had one this morning. His wife dragged him, and he's not quite as sharp as he should be. He's taking Benadryl every night. Benadryl is like the one drug I don't want. Well, there's a few, but Benadryl is the drug I don't want anybody on who has memory concerns, because it definitely inhibits memories from being formed. And so it's like, okay, let's quit that Benadryl. Thank you very much. So these things happen all of the time. So the issue of getting your memory numbers, if you come in and you take it, we'll send you a postcard each year to say, come back and take it again. You will have your own private file of saying what your memory number it is. And it does a couple of things. One is if you're starting to deteriorate, you can go to your doctor, you can come here wherever you wanted to and say, why might I be getting a little bit worse? But I think more importantly, it gives people the knowledge that they're okay. Because I know when people before COVID, everybody be at, I'd walk into McDonald's to get a breakfast now and again, and there'd be a group of usually old guys sitting around all shooting the breeze. And I know at some point during that conversation, they're going to go, Jimmy developed Alzheimer's disease. I'm worried about my memory. They go, oh yeah, I'm worried about it too. And then they don't do anything about it, but they just continue to worry. And so if you get your memory number each year, you won't have to worry because you'll say, you know what, I'm generally the same as I was 3 years ago. Isn't that great? And that takes away all the issues related to that. I think that's a very nice thing to do. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we're in this day and age where we actually have prevention research and we need people to participate. And so if you are in reasonably good health and you have any risk factors of Alzheimer's disease, like a relative with Alzheimer's disease, that we would love to see you. We were looking for people who are going to live so their liver can't be failing and all that kind of stuff. But in this, they would go through, it's all free, by the way. In fact, you make a few dollars off it, not much, but you make a few dollars. And what happens is that we will go through what it means to be in research, so a full informed consent. After that, then we would have you sign the consent forms. Consent doesn't mean you have to stay in the trial. Consent just means that we can talk to you. Then we would draw some blood, check an EKG, and we do some thinking testing. You pass through that hurdle, we get a brain scan that we pay for. Brain scan looks okay. In other words, there's not a tumor, some terrible strokes. Then you go on and you get that very specialized research PET scan to see if you have any of the protein that doesn't mean you're going to get to Alzheimer's disease, but could eventually go on to get Alzheimer's disease. Because the research medicines that we're going to give, we're given either research or placebo, take those proteins out of the brain. And so the old studies were to see if we could take it out of the brain. Now we know we can make the brain spick and span. And now we have a lot of data that says early treatment with these drugs slows down disease in people that have this disease. So the obvious question is, can we actually prevent disease by starting earlier, before anybody? And so we'll know in 7 years whether this is the cure of Alzheimer's disease. My guess is it probably won't be a full cure, but my strong guess is that we will dramatically slow disease where we've never been able to before by interdicting before a person had a problem. So it'll be a very happy time, I think, 7 years from now when we launch this. But we need people to participate. And let me now go to the issue of disparity in healthcare, because disparity in healthcare, I mentioned before this horrible thing that I'm giving you data on white people. I mean, ridiculous. So if you look at the drug that was recently approved by the FDA called Aduhelm, that in that trial, it was just absolutely shocking and terrible that out of the population that was studied, and this is a worldwide trial. So there's some countries that don't have a lot of minorities, but the reality is there should be plenty. That out of that population, there's 1,105 people that got the drug. Out of 1,105, 10% were Asian, 3% were Hispanic, and not 1%, not 1 full percent was African American. Isn't that horrific? I mean, just absolutely pathetic. Okay, and because of that, it's really shaking the tree. So this is good, shaking the tree to get the industry to pay attention. Here at the Columbus Memory Center, we've done a decent job. I mean, not as good as we could, but a decent job. So if you look at our enrollment, and we're usually in the top 5 for enrollment in the world, so we do a decent job. Our enrollment is somewhere between 19 and 24% for minorities. Okay, so that's nothing to really brag about, but compared to 10%, 3%, and not even a whole percent, that it's a lot better. Because of that, virtually every company has come to me to ask me what's the secret to the sauce. How do we do it? And they want me to really, what their company is like, what slogan do you use? And I go, look, this is not about a slogan. This is about trust. The distrust that minorities have for doctors and healthcare is well earned. We've earned this distrust. And the only way that we're going to overcome these hurdles is by being in the community, giving lectures at churches, going to community groups, having discussions like this, being open and honest about the terrible things that we've done in the past, talk about the Tuskegee Project and the million other experiments that have been done. And that's how we can succeed. So I don't think there's going to be a quick turnover, but I bring this up because I want to throw out some guilt that we need you. We need you. If you're of a minority background, we need you. And the only way the results can really represent your ethnicity is if you're involved in the research. So I got to use my guilt. And I'm a Jewish guy, so I've been trained for years and years and doing good guilt. And so we need you. So come in, we'll talk about it. We actually are starting a new website called, I think it hasn't launched yet. I think it's gonna be called Equality in Healthcare. And it's gonna be just dedicated to answering questions that underrepresented communities might have about research. We're gonna have some cameos by various people of color that would give their impression about things. And the whole website, which will launch soon, will be dedicated to getting people to be more knowledgeable and more comfortable about participating, because I can certainly understand why they wouldn't be. But in our field, in my practice, I've been very pleased and maybe a little arrogant too, that in all these years I've been doing research my whole career here, more than 25 years, I've had one single family that didn't enroll in research because they didn't trust us. One single family. And it was interesting. It was a mother and her 3 daughters. And I said, we'd love to have you involved. And they said, what does it cost? And I go, well, it's great news. I said, it doesn't cost anything. In fact, you'll be paid for your time. And they go, do you think we just fell off a turnip truck? And I go, no, let me explain this. And I mean, I tell you what, I could hardly get another word. They were so distrustful, and I did my best, but that's the only family that has not come in, at least that I know of from a standpoint of trust. So we've got a good record of trust. We need people to participate. And so please tell a friend. Well, and by the way, if you have a church or if you have a community group where you want me or somebody from my thing to come out and talk, we will do it. We've got an outreach van that we call the Think Tank. And so just let us know that. We will be launching this website in the very near future, probably within the next couple of weeks. And we've applied for a community grant for this. I don't know if we'll get it or not, but I'm hoping we will. And if that happens, we're going to incentivize churches. We're going to give away $5,000 to 5 different churches that create committees to recognize Alzheimer's disease, or to be supportive to members in their church in other words, to learn more about Alzheimer's disease, really what it comes down to. There's another one. I'll give a shout out. There's a wonderful gal named Dr. Theron Epps, and she's developed a program trying to help communities of color in the religious community. That's why it's called Alter. Better get involved. And so she's developed this thing called Alter. And she tells me that, at least in the Columbus area, and I was very surprised about this, that she hasn't been able to get churches to enroll because the pastors, and I just really amazed at this, said it's really not an issue for their congregations. They don't see Alzheimer's disease, and which only means that they're not opening their eyes to Alzheimer's disease, right? It's dramatic. I mean, you see the statistics I'm giving you. It's there. It's everywhere. And I said to her, listen, I need you, and maybe you need me. I said, because I know everybody. We can get into these churches, and I want to introduce you, because these pastors are good people. But if they're not taking Alzheimer's disease seriously, they're not being fully good to their flocks. And I'm gonna in the nicest way point that out. All right. So that's my long diatribe. Left some time for questions, and so feel free to ask questions if you want to.
Linda, you have your hand up. Sorry, Sandra, you take charge. I'll be quiet.
And platters, the kitchen kind of
Okay, Linda. Yeah, I had to look. I felt like I was on whatever that show is where you beat the buzzer. I'm headed to Mobile, and I pulled over so I could be the first one to ask this question. Number one, I need your information in the chat, because I belong to a church where our congregation, 80% is over 60 years old. I have no shame in saying that, because that's where we are right now, and we need you very bad. But this is my issue. One morning I woke up and I was so distressed that I couldn't remember what I was supposed to do today, because I had so much to do. I went to my doctor, and it was found out that I had vertigo. She recommended me to have an MRI scan, on my brain. So I did that reluctantly. Then they told me that it was negative. And I ain't believing them because of the history you talked about. So I love the information about the memory count. So where do we start with that? With our private physician, or what?
Okay, so listen, several pieces of that one. All right. So first of all, when you wake up and you're confused, that happens to all of us. Okay, we call that a confusional arousal. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is that we all have slips. I think I told you this the last time I spoke to you, but I just bears repeating to give everybody a deep breath. Okay. That, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at an Alzheimer's gala. And because I lecture a lot, I keep a calendar. So I never accept it without looking at my calendar. I looked at my calendar, it was free, so I accepted it. But something was just in the back of my head. And I went home to my lovely wife. We're having dinner. I said, you know what? I accepted this talk. I don't have anything on the calendar, but it just something sticks in my head that it could be important. She goes, I said, do we have anything that day? She goes, nothing other than our wedding anniversary. All right. And so it's like, oh my God, how could I forget our wedding anniversry? Right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I don't need your help. But yeah, wow is the right answer. Now you sound like my wife. But I give that little answer there because we all have slip ups. It shouldn't be the end of the world, right? We do these kind of dumb things from time to time. So that's the confusional arousals, occasional slip up. Separately, dizziness has nothing to do with memory loss. And I will tell you what your diagnosis is, and I shouldn't do this. So let me just fully say, I'm not your doctor. Don't listen to anything I say, but it's very classic to wake up with dizziness that comes from the inner ear, not from the brain. It's called BPPV, benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, BPPV. Look it up on WebMD, see if it fits you. Talk it over with your doctor. But the reality is they were never going to find anything in the brain on that scan. It was going to be this inner ear problem, which is very, very common, very treatable. You can get rid of it the same day. Next is your memory. Sound like you're very bright and very capable. Come take the memory number or something like it once a year. Your doctor, by the way, if you're above 65, your doctor can be paid to give you a memory test once a year. So you don't have to take our free memory test. You can just get it as part of your physical examination. But only 12% of people ever get that test done because either the doctor doesn't want to give it or doesn't know how to give it, or the patient doesn't want it or doesn't ask for it. So that's another way to go get it. Okay. In regard to your church, love to speak to your church. We can, and by the way, so the memory number, we can even bring out as an electronic version. If you want, we can leave it at the church, or paper versions, and we come pick them up. We could leave a table so people could take it at their own time over a month or 2 or 3, and then send them their results. So we do that with churches as well. So let us know if you want something like that done. We'd be happy to do that. My communications director is named Amanda, and she's the one that arranged all this kind of stuff, so she can connect you with all this kind of stuff. Okay.
Thank you so much. And I did have my ears cleaned out, and you know what? After that, I could even see better. So thank you so much thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Karen, for this this program today.
Oh, thank you. Who's else got a question there?
Patrick.
Let me unmute. Yes, thank you. When you talk about genetics, this gets real close to my home. My dad died of Alzheimer's. My grandmother died of Alzheimer's. 3 of his first cousins died of Alzheimer's. So I've been told if you've been hit in the head, which I've been knocked out, which I have been done twice, different occasions. When I was young and as I got older, they said that increases your chances of getting Alzheimer's along with the heredity part. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so everything that damages brain cells increase your risk. I think the classic you're kind of mentioning this way is the NFL, right? They realize that these guys are getting hit so hard so frequently that their brain has hundreds of concussions in there. We can actually see on autopsy that little spots of brain have died with the various concussions. So whenever you lose brain cells, you don't have brain cells to fight against the onset of Alzheimer's disease. The bigger the brain, in other words, the more cells there are that are there, the longer it will take to ever show Alzheimer's disease. So you have a very strong genetic history. Doesn't mean you're ever going to get it, but you have a strong genetic history. You can't do anything about getting knocked out because I'm sure you didn't do it on purpose. If you're a boxer, I would say quit boxing. If you're an NFL player, I don't think anybody should play football, frankly, even though I enjoy watching it. A little hypocrite, I guess. But so you would protect your head the best you can. And then you do all the things that you can as far as a healthy lifestyle. Those 5 things I mentioned, you should try and do at least 4 of them, right? That's a good, healthy thing. And then maybe you're the kind of person, I don't know your age or whatnot, or your health, but if you're otherwise healthy and you're above age 50, you should look into our prevention research. You're the kind of person we want to see if you have any risk and additional risk. And then you may get into these research trials where you'd be watched very closely and either get a drug that does clear the brain of amyloid, or that if you started to change to somebody who started to develop memory loss, that you would get the best proven medication at that time. So I'm glad you're paying attention to it. I want you to take a deep breath. We all need to take a deep breath. It's a common illness. Doesn't mean you're gonna get this illness. And so just do the best you can in the best ways you can. Other questions?
I just put in the chat Amanda's information
Oh, thank you for
and
doing that.
telephone number. Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that. So anyway, if you guys would do me the favor of getting the message out, anybody can stop by our office any day that we're here and get the memory number. That we do need people to volunteer, everybody to volunteer for Alzheimer's prevention. I give that extra emphasis from communities of color because two things: one, we need you, and two, we get to brag. I mean, they're coming to our doorstep because we're doing well, so that really makes me want to do well, right? But we need everybody involved. So we all got to play a role in this. We are on the verge of greatness with this disease. It's just around the corner. We need everybody's help. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Liss. And we can say that we truly are smarter today than we will be on tomorrow.
You made my day with that one. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay. Karen, any other things we need to do today?
I just want to screen share really quickly that we are set for our April lunch bunch. And we have the fortunate opportunity to take advantage and have Debbie Simons, who's chair of the TRS board, talk to us about TRS basics next month, and other members of the GAE-Retired TRS monitoring committee will be also sharing on the program. And the purpose of doing this the first week of April is hopefully to, number one, attract our active members to join us, because it'll be spring break and they too need to know about their retirement system. And we will be at that point in time at the end of, close to the end of the legislative session, and we have slid under the radar concerning TRS legislation this year that would adversely affect our retirement system. But I obviously maintain the more we know about it, the more vigilant that we can become. So I hope you will join us for that virtual lunch bunch, always held the first Wednesday of the month. And that's all I have to share, Miss Sandra. And thank you, Debbie, for agreeing to come on board.
Thanks, everybody, for coming today. And
Thank
remember, we're going to be smarter tomorrow than we are today.
And
Thank you.
last thing, there is a GAE-Retired business meeting this Friday from 11 to 2. And In the Loop was sent out yesterday to you. It has the link to that meeting. So either click there or email me, and hope to see you also on Friday. Thank you all so much for being here.
Bye-bye.
Sandra, can I have a moment to push for the grant?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, briefly, GAE-Retired was honored to have a grant from NEA for legislative advocacy. And I want all of you to know that we're meeting tomorrow, legislative committee, to develop our plan for a committee of one. The urgency is to fight back the suppression of voter education and voter rights. So when you hear from us, please respond in the positive. You don't have a choice because you're a member of GAE, and you know we don't take anything less. Thank you so much, ladies. I am so overjoyed that I'm truly, nothing is wrong with me from that doctor's standpoint with my memory. So I'm good. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Cyril.
Hey, I want to thank everyone for support for last month for my stress workshop. Thank you.